Alright, we're about to walk into the Missouri Prairie Foundation Seed Barn. And we're going to talk to Jeff, who's the area manager. And we're going to start learning about Prairie Fork and how we restore tall grass prairie. And oh, there he is. There's Jeff right there.
Hey. Well, hello, welcome to Prairie Fork Conservation Area. My name is Jeff DeMann. I'm with the Missouri Department of Conservation, and I'm a wildlife management biologist. And what we do here is we manage state properties in two counties, Montgomery and Callaway County. And Prairie Fork here is of 911 acres, and it was donated by Edward Jones, Ted and Pat Jones. And our facility here is a seed barn, and we take all of our prairie seed that we collect throughout the year, and we process it, and we put it back onto Prairie Fork. So that's one of the biggest goals we have, is to take crop fields and turn them back into native remnant prairie. So they're not remnant prairie, but we use remnant seed to make prairie. So I'll show you guys a few of the sites we have. All of our seed bags over here. This is where we take all of the individual species and we collect them. We get them in big piles. We actually use this hammer mill over here to process the seed. I'll let you scan over here to the hammer mill. Once we get a seed type, and we'll go out on the prairie and show you guys some seeds, but we take this seed and we get it into this hammer mill, and different screens that we use will process, these different seed types, and they can fall through based on their size. And it just kind of gets them a lot cleaner, so when we throw them out onto the landscape, we'll get better seed to soil contact. So pretty cool machine. This is donated by the National Wild Turkey Federation, which is, it's kind of odd, you might think, for prairie, but wild turkeys benefit from prairie habitats as well too. So pretty cool. As you look across the whole rest of the area over here, all of our cleaning equipment. This is another type of cleaning mill. This is a small mill for like mints and little bitty tiny seeds, almost dust. Of course, these are our big screens. So before we put them into the hammer mill, we take all of our seed and we pile them up into the screens here, and we process through them. And again, these are different sizes for seed to fall out.
Well, let's maybe go by the step by step. Let's say we went out in the field, we collected a whole bunch of seeds, we've sorted it into its appropriate bag.
Yep.
Now what do we do?
So we take it from the field, we make sure it dries properly, then we use it, put it in the hammer mill through these screens and through all these cleaning equipment. Once we get those, then we hang them over there in the bags, because those are cleaned and processed. And we put them in these smaller bags too, for the smaller species. Literally, some of these plant species can be dust. I mean, just little bitty pieces of pepper. And this is a tedious process, but it's required because a lot of these seeds that we're putting out there on the landscape aren't commercially sold. So once we have them hanging over here in the bags and here for a while, in December or January, we do what's called a big collection. We're bring all the seed together, and in fact, I have a picture to show you guys what that seed will look like. It's hundreds of pounds of processed seed. I don't know if you guys can see that picture there.
Yep.
But it's that's a year's worth of work. That's probably $20,000 worth of seed in value as far as labor to collect it. That's the seed we put onto 40 acres. So we do this in January. We do a dormant seeding because it's the best time for our forb species to get established. They need a stratification process where they freeze and thaw and work their way down into the soil. So it's a really neat process to see all of our seed collectors start from April all the way through October. And typically we have you guys come out and we'll go out in the field and show you what we would normally collect. But we have a lot of groups come out, volunteer groups come out and collect prairie seed throughout the year. And we use these bags right here. Here, I'll show you right here. You just put it on your hip, and you get some clippers. We got boxes of clippers, and you'll clip the stem and put it in here, and then bring it back, and we'll do a big dump, and then we'll start getting all that ready. But
and so after you clip the seed head, that's where it goes on here, where you can kind of rub it down through the screen, and the seeds will fall down.
Yeah, we get, it's not what's called pure live seed. If you look into prairie species, they sell it commercially called pure live seed. That's actually down to the seed. We actually sow ours with some trash. And the reason why we do that is because it takes a lot more labor to get down to pure live seed. We're not selling any of it because we're a state agency. And our system really works. We've been doing it for 16 years now and developing a lot of really neat prairie units based on the poundage that we put out there. And we plant a total of 284 species a year, which is a lot of species of remnant and plants that aren't commercially sold and some that are commercially sold. So it's a pretty neat process. After we get all the seed, we'll go out and show you guys some of the prairie units, but I will mention how do you actually come to the process of determining a prairie and where it's at. And that's what I do for the state, is we manage conservation areas for what they should be and what natural habitats and communities are there. And we do this based on many different pieces of information, scientific information. And one of them is the soil layers. This is Danville Conservation Area. And it shows all the different types of soil units within Danville. And then, you know, from that, we'll take the topography and the geology, the historic vegetation, a lot of this information, we bring it all together and do what's called ecological land types. And what that means is we're not going to put a prairie in a spot where it should be a wetland. We're going to use scientific data to determine, okay, where was our prairies historically? And historically it would have been on most of our broad ridges and our plains and out here at Prairie Fork. We'll show you guys the broad flat prairie plains. But this is an example. The pink shows you an example of where all of our glades are at on Danville. Glades are a community with shallow soils, exposed rock, kind of desert-like conditions where we have tarantulas and scorpions and some really neat prairie plants. And these are all maintained by fire.
Yep.
So,
and we'll try to get PDFs of these maps up so you guys can see them.
yes, and I hope these are okay, but this shows kind of the prairie continuum. And this is all based on canopy structure. So historically, a prairie didn't have a lot of trees, very low canopy. Then you get up into here's the prairie and glade and savanna, and you get up into the woodlands and forests where you have a lot more trees overhead. So
we'll get a PDF of that
up
as well.
Yep. And then we can head outside and check out some species that we collect. But it's a really big process. We have 12 staff that work for the Conservation Department here in our district, and we go out and we do a lot of management work where we do exotic species spraying, we do our prescribed burning, we do all the seed collection, obviously. And like I said, we do about 40 acres a year, and we'd like to do that on crop ground and preferably on following beans, soybeans. So Roundup Ready soybean fields are perfect because after the crop is harvested, you pretty much have bare soil. Most of our farmers around here are on a corn beans rotation, and this Prairie Fork is a typical Missouri farm. When it was, we got the farm in 1997. It was donated by, like I said, Ted and Pat Jones, and it was a very typical Missouri farm. It had cattle, had crops, and slowly we've taken all of the crop acres, and these are the crop acres, and now they are prairie. So we're up here in this red square at the MPF property, Missouri Prairie Foundation property, and it's a total 911 acres, and you can see we're almost 500 acres of reconstructed prairie already completed, already planted. So these are all the different colors of the different years that we planted. The red is the 2004, and we planted this square that was a farmer's field, or a permittee farmer's field. We planted that this year in January. So continuing to plant the prairie. So yeah. So we take a crop field such as a soybean field, and we do a dormant seeding, like I said, in December and January. And we take a fertilizer buggy, this big buggy that you can pull behind with a tractor, and we put all of our seed, that big pile of seed you saw in that photo, we take it and we put it in there with potash. It's kind of like a filler, because a lot of our native seed grasses and forbs are all real fluffy, and it's hard to kind of distribute them. So we want that as a carrier, and we do that on snowfall because we like to see where our seed is actually falling down and what kind of distribution we have. So we like to do our dormant seeding after a snowfall. And it really works out great. We take that buggy and we go back and forth throughout the 40 acres and get good coverage. And it takes probably 3 or 4 years before we start seeing a lot of the plants that we've planted. And we do some maintenance mowings. So that first year we'll go out and we'll mow pretty high, because if you mow low you can really hurt the plants, but you mow high enough to take off the canopy. Kind of look at it like an umbrella. A lot of the new annual plants that are popping up, we didn't plant those, but it's sunlight is getting the ground and it's new, and they're like, oh, this is great, let's just start growing. So we want to cut that umbrella top off and just to have the stem, so then our plants that are on the ground, our 284 species, they can get good sunlight and germinate and go from there. But yeah, we do mowings the first year 2 times, and we do mowings the second year 1 time, and we really don't do prescribed burning until like year 3 or 4, because you want to let those plants, most of those prairie plants, they're growing below the ground first, and then they're coming up later. So we work with private landowners across the state, and they get worried after they do their prairie plantings. They call us up in a panic after year 1 or 2, and they're like, I'm not seeing the plants. Well, yeah, we know. It takes a while for things to develop. And even species that we planted, we've got, like I said, we've got a 16-year history here on Prairie Fork. We're seeing new species pop up every year because it just takes time. There's a lot of stuff that goes below the ground, microbial interactions that we just don't understand yet, and science, we're always working on it. But we're seeing new species every year. So, and a lot of those has to depend on our older plantings. Our older plantings up here on the north, we're seeing a lot more because they have more time to mature, more time to develop. So, yeah,
cool.
Pretty cool. Over here is our flail vac. This is a really important piece of equipment that we use to collect our seed. Like I said, a lot of it has to be hand collected, but we have a cooperative agreement, relationship with MU, where we actually manage the habitat there at Tucker Prairie, and in return we get a chance to harvest a lot of the remnant seed there, which is really high quality. Tucker Prairie is a clay pan prairie. It's glacial till, but below it is a hard pan that doesn't allow water to drain through, so it kind of holds water a little bit more than other prairies, which is pretty unique. And we'll go outside and show you how big and broad and flat these prairies are. But this flail vac, it's got a brush on the front. If you get down in here, you'll see the brush down below. And you can actually raise and lower the height of the bucket based on what seeds are in bloom, or not in bloom, but ready to harvest. So we take the flail vac and we haul it all to these little different remnant places, mostly on Tucker. But in addition to the hand harvesting, which is a lot of what we do the flail vac, and we can, like I said, change different heights based on what's ready for harvest. So it's a really important piece of equipment. So here's one of our big prairie units on Prairie Fork, and this is really typical. It's a big, broad, flat plain. And this is a part of what's called the Grand Prairie that encompassed over 10 counties in Missouri. Thousands and thousands of acres, all the way up into northeast Missouri and over into central Colombia, Mexico. This is all one big, flat, broad plain. And one of the goals here for this area, because it was donated by Ted and Pat Jones, is that Pat really liked prairie, and she wanted to restore all this. And we're like, this is great, because prairie requires a lot more funding because that seed is so hard to harvest. And I didn't mention inside some of these species, but different species bloom from April all the way through October. So I may mention some species that are not in bloom right now, and that's okay, but I want to tell you about some of the values of some of this seed. Seed out here can be anywhere from hundreds of dollars per pound to thousands of dollars per pound. So it's important to understand that if you want to plant a prairie yourself, you can start with a small amount of seed species, like 15 to 20 species. You can still have a nice little prairie, but 284 species would be extremely expensive, and a lot of it, like I said, only half of it you could commercially buy. The other half species you have to hand pick. So this is Indian grass. It's not ready yet, but you would take the seed and you would just rake it off your hand, and you've got seed right here, and then you take it and put it in your bag. But that's basically how we hand collect a lot of this stuff. This prairie is broad, like I said. It used to be 10 counties. Missouri was actually 15 million acres, over 15 million acres of prairie, so a third of the state. So you got to remember, a third of the state was on fire once every 3 years. That's how you maintain a prairie. And the Native Americans did all the burning. Many people believe that lightning strikes were a major cause. It was some of it, but most of it was Native Americans. And we've got historical and scientific data to prove that Native Americans burned, and they burned so frequently. So another third of our state was on fire also for woodlands and savannas and glades. So you got to imagine, I'm going to talk about fire a lot because fire is really crucial to the system. And we use fire as managers, and we encourage, landowners to use fire. It's a really important tool, and it's kind of like if a wetland is dependent upon water, prairie and those other systems are dependent upon fire. So 2/3 of our state in Missouri was on fire once every 5 years. So a lot of fire. And fires wouldn't just go to the Highway 70, where you can maybe see up here. It'd keep going all the way north, even to Iowa. The tallgrass prairie is what we are in, and tallgrass prairie was all the way through Iowa, all the way up into Minnesota, parts of Kansas, and a little bit of Nebraska, and that has to do with the rain shadow of the Rocky Mountains. So from the Rocky Mountains you have this big, tall land mass that's drastically changing precipitation on the landscape, and the rain shadow means that weather systems would come across the United States and hit the Rockies. Those states that are right next to the Rockies immediately, so coming from west to east, so Colorado, Wyoming, right there would be shortgrass prairie. And then in the middle is going to be your medium-sized prairie. And then your tallgrass prairie is where you're not as affected by the Rockies, and we're getting almost the full precipitation. So Missouri, we get a lot of precipitation, whereas in Nebraska, you can actually see the 3 different kinds of prairie. You can see the tall grass, the medium grass, and the short grass prairie all in one state, because it's just how their state is laid out. But it kind of goes throughout the Midwest states that way. But we're a tall grass prairie, like I said, over 15 million acres of prairie, and unfortunately, we have less than 1% of native remnant prairie left in Missouri, and most of that, as you guys will probably guess, is due to crops. And cropping is a really good thing. It feeds America, corn and soybeans, but that's one of the first things settlers did when they came to, after Louisiana Purchase, when they came across this country, is they broke ground, used the plow, and started their homestead. But for the Conservation Department, our goal is to bring back a native prairie, and a lot of prairie that you bring back really helps out a lot of declining species like grassland birds and specific reptiles and amphibians, mammals, certainly pollinators and insects, bees, native bees. This stuff is really important for that ecosystem. So and wish I could show you guys the fire, but just one thing I want to take away from this talk today is fire's good, fire's great, let's go burn something. If you can't do it yourself, you can attend the Prescribed Burn Workshop. We put them on throughout the whole state to show landowners how to burn. And we talked about earlier how to tell what a landscape is, what it should be. Was it remnant prairie? Like say you buy a farm and you don't know, was there prairie in the past, or was there woodland, was there a glade on there? You can get biologists like myself come out to your farm in every county of the state in Missouri and help you for free determine what you got and where you want to go if you want to manage for good, healthy habitats, and I would highly encourage that. So I'll show you a burn unit picture, what we got here on Prairie Fork. These are our burn units, and they're broken up into, several hundred acres to smaller units like 12 acres, but we're in this 41 acre unit right here on the northern end of Prairie Fork. But we typically burn in our district. We have over 18,000 acres. We burn easily a third of Prairie Fork every year. So,
and again, we'll have a PDF of some burn units and schedules up.
Yeah, but in our district, we burn thousands of acres a year, and it's really important. Whetstone, which is just north of here, that's 5,200 acres. South of here is Reform, 7,000. To the east is Danville. It's got really high quality woodlands and glades. We burn thousands of acres there too. And we also do contract burning. So there's cost share out there for landowners and to do burning. So we encourage folks to burn because it's a really important process. And we wouldn't have this beautiful prairie if it wasn't for fire and keeping care of it. So that'll segue me as far as taking care of it into the exotic species control. One of the things we do is we go out and we find big patches of species that we don't want. And so a lot of those species here on Prairie Fork are Sericea lespedeza, bush honeysuckle, autumn olive, and these species can actually crowd out the natives. So if we didn't do this broadcast spraying, and then if we didn't do the spot spraying, and this is where we get all of our folks together and we get backpack sprayers and we spray individual plants. If we didn't do this broad prairie here, we probably have close to 200 species of plants. It'd be down to about 15, 20 species of plants in about a 5 to 10 year period with Sericea, because it just takes over, crowds out the natives, and you lose hundreds of species of not just plants but animals too. So
we could probably find some to show you at some point today.
Yeah, unfortunately we'll find a few species out there of Sericea, but this is to show you what we do on Prairie Fork to spray Sericea. We attack it everywhere where there's prairie. Yeah. So just give an example of what we do on an annual basis out here.
So where does Sericea come from and why is it so problematic?
Yeah, I mean, great question. Sericea, I would encourage you guys to never plant anything that's not native to Missouri. So even your landscaping, your mom and dad probably got a house. They probably got shrubs and trees and plants from Lowe's or Home Depot. I would highly encourage you not to do that, to plant natives, because the native birds and mammals and animals depend upon that native species to provide insects and seeds. So Sericea came from Asia, and a lot of our exotic species in the United States come from different countries. We think it's going to be a good plant. We put it. Sericea was developed, or not developed, but brought over here in the 1920s and 30s in the Dust Bowl, and it was planted for soil erosion, to control it, to help keep our soils. But we learned, later that it's the devil of the prairie nowadays. Area managers like myself across this whole country are battling Sericea lespedeza to keep it out of our prairie and to keep the high diversity high. So it's just extremely aggressive. It produces thousands of seeds a year, and like I said, it's aggressive enough to take out natives. One example I'd give you about an exotic taking over natives is crayfish. There's many exotic crayfish species, and we've made a lot of developments across the United States to get rid of the exotic species of crayfish. But if you go to your bait shop and you buy crayfish, you can buy crayfish. All those crayfish are not native, and unfortunately people, when they're done fishing, if they don't use all their crayfish, they're like, oh, just dump it back in the lake or the stream, and then there you go, you've got exotic crayfish. And what they do is they crowd out the native crayfish, and then that affects the fish species, that affects all the insects, because the exotic crayfish don't act and don't have the same life cycle as what the natives do. So highly encourage you guys to plant native plants and trees and everything. But Sericea is certainly one we attack, and the best thing to control it with, like I said, is herbicide. There's herbicides out there that are species specific, and they don't harm a lot of our forbs. Forbs is a word for wildflowers, broadleaf plants, but you can buy like Roundup would just kill everything. It's a contact herbicide, so it would kill the Sericea, but it would also kill all of our awesome prairie plants. So we don't want that.
So how much time and effort and money do you think you spend every year fighting invasive plants just here on Prairie Fork?
It's a good question. It goes up every year. I'd say exotic species wise, we probably spend $30,000 on control just on Prairie Fork. And the reason why we spend that much money is because we have a $20,000 investment in just the seed alone to plant 40 acres. And so we have 500 acres of that. You can do the math. That's a lot of money in prairie seed. And it's a yearly battle. And in my career, when I first came on 22 years ago, we didn't do very much exotic species control because it wasn't around as much. And it just grows every year. And once you let it establish, you've got more work on your hands. So
is it just permanently in the seed bank here, and that's why it just keeps coming back? Is that?
Well, I wouldn't say permanently in the seed bank. If you do aggressive control for many, many years, sometimes decades, you can actually affect the seed bank and have a really good control of it. So, like here on Prairie Fork, we don't have big patches of it. And if somebody would come here, if you didn't have a trained eye, you'd be like, oh, I don't see any Sericea. But if you walk throughout this prairie, you'll find a Sericea plant here or there. Now, we don't have these big fields of it, like some areas do, if you let it go. So if you attack it and you keep after it, you can make big time progress. And we spend that much every year just as a preventative, because we really want that high quality. Some folks don't have that type of funding, and that's okay. You can still make an impact with what you can, and then just manage it with fire. Unfortunately, fire doesn't affect Sericea. We wish it did, but it doesn't affect it negatively. So, Sericea is in the seed bank, but another reason why we do that crop rotation is because that has a big impact on our seed bank. So, you might not be able to see it, but across all surrounding Prairie Fork is cropland. So, corn, soybeans, and that's Roundup ready, meaning that the farmers spray Roundup, and it's been scientifically altered to where it doesn't kill the crop. So it's Roundup ready means it's safe from Roundup. So you kill all the weeds in the field, which is what a farmer wants, but it saves his crop. So that has a big effect on Sericea year after year. So we like when farmers treat our fields for 10, 20, 30 years before we put prairie into it, because the seed bank is not as aggressive at all for Sericea.
In fact, one of the things I think when you're starting to restore a prairie from scratch is you plant it a few years in that Roundup ready soybean, just to kill everything else.
It's really important. Yeah, you want a minimum of 10 years, in our opinion, of Roundup ready crops to get that seed bank set back, because we've made the mistake of planting it into 2 or 3 years of Roundup ready crops, and then 2 or 3 years later you've got Sericea all throughout your plot. So
it's almost counterintuitive. You think, I've got a plot of land, I want to restore it into a prairie, and the first thing they're going to tell you is plant soybeans for 10 years.
Yeah, actually you can make some income off of it. If you have a pretty good sized piece of property, let's say you got 50 acres, 100 acres, and a lot of it's tillable, you can plant crops in it, you can actually charge cash rent, because nothing's free. If you want to come make some money on my ground, I'll charge you a cash rent. So for example, farmers will pay $200 to $300 per acre to plant crops on your, depending on where you're at, sometimes as low as $50 an acre. But you can take that, say you got 100 acres, that's a lot of money. You can store that, and then after 10 years of that, you can buy your prairie seed and use that to buy chemical for Sericea, and that'll help you finance the farm. So
cool.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to take a walk out here. We're going to show, and so in a normal semester, you guys would be out here, and
helping us out.
Jeff would put you to work, and he'd show you some plants, and you would actually be collecting the seed. Since you're not here, we're going to take a walk out into the prairie, and Jeff's going to show us some of the more common native plants and some of the ones that you might have been collecting seed for. And
all right. So first off, I'll just mention, here's a really cool plant. This is compass plant. It's got these big broad leaves, and it usually has a really tall stem. And I don't see compass out here matured, but You know, compass is a really conservative species. I've actually got a picture of the flower here when it's in bloom. But it's a conservative species of a 6. It's on a scale of 1 to 10. That's it's called a coefficient of conservatism. But the reason why they call it compass plant is because the leaves are facing east and west, so they want to catch that sunlight. And Native Americans used to say you can. This is not 100%. Obviously, this guy's facing a little north and south, but that's the reason why they call it compass, because these leaves usually face east and west to catch the most amount of sunlight. So really cool plant. This is a native Indian grass right here. This is a really good warm season grass, and it's throughout the country. Here's slender mountain mint. This is a neat little plant. I've actually probably got a picture for that as well. Rattlesnake master. This is rattlesnake master. This is what the seed head looks like, and this is the plant itself right here. Kind of looks similar to a yucca, but south of Prairie Fork, just about 15 miles down by the Missouri River, there was a cave that MU did some research in and discovered a lot of artifacts, Native American artifacts, and they found a sandal that was made entirely out of rattlesnake master leaves. So it was 8,000 years old when they dated it. So if you want, you guys can come out to Prairie Fork and get some rattlesnake master leaves and make some sandals.
Yep.
So there you go.
But don't actually do that.
That's right. That's right. All right. Black-eyed Susan. You guys may have heard of that one. That's a really cool species of plant. All right. We're going to be looking for some plant species that you guys would have picked. All right. Still looking. Here's one in bloom. I'll show you guys at least something in bloom. This is ironweed. It's a cool little guy.
Yep.
Native species right next to black-eyed Susan.
Hey, here's a praying mantis.
Oh, there we go. Cool.
May or may not come out on camera. There we go.
Oh, he's right there, yeah.
Yep.
That's cool. All right, well, here's one of them right here. And I know it's not much to look at, but when you guys are walking around the prairie, you know, I'll show you. This is gray-headed coneflower. And that's what this is. When it's in bloom, when it's not in bloom, all you get is this little gray head right here. And this is what we basically clip, or you could pull it. So you could take your clippers and clip it right at the end and then put it in your bag, or you can just pull it like this. And when you grind it up, that's all, every single one of those is a little bitty seeds. And that's what we would collect. And so you just take the top off and just put it in your bag, and then when these dry, like this is really hard, so it's not going to break up really easily. So when we dry these, we put these in the hammer mill, and they would break up inside. Like here's some more right over here. Here's some right here, another plant. So you just go along and just pull the top, and then you put them in your bag. I don't have my bag, but
You have to put them in your pocket.
there you go.
Don't waste it.
Gray-headed coneflower right there. Pretty cool species. All right, well, I haven't mentioned the money part about some of this, but I wanted to show you guys compass leaves at least. We'll try to find some species out of it. Compass is one that's really expensive. Hundreds of dollars per pound, because it's just hard to find and it's hard to collect. So as we go throughout, some of these more common ones like rattlesnake master, they're much obviously cheaper, so higher demand, higher price. This is round-head bush clover. It's a cool native plant. Something we would collect a little bit later on when it matures, but a rounded bush clover. Here's partridge pea. I'm just going to show you guys some cool plants. This is gray head coneflower right here, one of the species we would have collected right next to partridge pea. This is a native legume, which means it has a bean. It's a native legume, so it's a pod forming. It's really good wildlife food. A lot of wildlife eat those, and you can see the plant right there, partridge pea, is just loaded with these bean pods. So. Oh, here we go. Here's a good one. All right. This is a really cool plant, Monarda fistulosa. It's a, I've got a picture of what it looks like in bloom. Wild bergamot. Wild bergamot. It's a coefficient value of 4, which means it's a good species. It's in the mint family. So if you guys are out here, you can grab a seed head and you smell it. It smells real minty. Square stem, but this is another species. We would just take it and you could clip it, but the easiest way is just to pop the seed head off. And these are not dry enough yet, so the seeds are not breaking up real well. They're starting to a little bit, but these we would have to set out to dry. You'd want to get them. We would collect. See, there's a little bit of stem. That's okay. You spread them out on the floor and let them all dry uniformly before we break them up and clean them. So it's wild bergamot. It's a bee balm. It's a really good pollinator. A lot of native bees and butterflies really are attracted to the flower because it is quite showy. So pretty cool plant.
Also smells good now that you picked it.
Yeah, smells really good. So the next one we'll look for is Penstemon digitalis, foxglove beard tongue. It's a neat little plant, but Monarda, the wild bergamot, a really good pollinator. So we're just kind of working through some. I've got ashy sunflower. These have already been grazed by white-tailed deer. You can see it right here. Every single top has been plucked off by white-tailed deer. And this is slender mountain mint. This is black-eyed Susan. This is Indian grass. This is that rattlesnake master. So you're seeing a lot of theme. Here's a goldenrod. You guys, I'm sure you get those who like allergies. Good goldenrod right there. There's the partridge pea. Now I'm just pointing out some cool grasses. Here's prairie dropseed. That's a really neat prairie grass. So yeah. And what we would do is, we would have you guys split up into 4 groups probably. Like one group would pick the gray head coneflower, another group would pick the wild bergamot, another group would pick that really tall compass plant, another group would pick the foxglove beard tongue, which is Penstemon digitalis, and we'll show you that here soon. And that way you guys would rotate, and once you do a plant long enough, you'll develop a search image, and you'll start to understand what you're looking for out here. And so this kind of gives you an idea of what our seed collectors do from April all the way through October. So whatever seed species, black-eyed Susan, it'll come in ready to be picked here in the next month or so. So all throughout the year, many different times of the year. Indian grass, it'll be up for picking here in a couple weeks. So pretty cool. Mike, here's a good picture of the prairie dropseed. It's a lot better, real robust plant, really cool. Here's ashy sunflower that is just out of bloom. You can see there's different phases. You know, some of it is some of the stuff we saw earlier was a lot further along, but this just lost its petals right here. So really neat plant. All right, so we found one of the terrible plants. This is Sericea lespedeza. So this guy right here, I certainly don't want him out in the prairie, but as you can see, he's starting to be in bloom. Got these white flowers on it, and we can still spray this plant this time of the year. We just changed the type of herbicide, but we usually, right now, in this stage, we're doing a lot of prescribed burning, and we're doing a lot of haying to offset some of the Sericea that we missed just with our spraying. But yeah, this guy right here is no good. So that's Sericea lespedeza.
That is the public enemy number one.
Yes, public enemy number one, and we took this walk. This is the first plant I've seen, so I don't see it anywhere around us, so that's good.
Still a plant you can buy sacks of seeds for.
Yeah, unfortunately, many highway departments and many municipalities would give this seed out for free, just hand people bags of it. Even as recently as 5 years ago, highway departments were still putting it on their roads and the sides of the roads. So yeah, we certainly encourage folks to not plant Sericea lespedeza. Here's a neat plant, cardinal flower, that shows up in moisture areas along streams all across Missouri. This happens to be a little shallow depression, a little wetland. There's that ironweed again. There's goldenrod, more black-eyed Susan, really cool looking plant. But yeah, cardinal flower is one of my favorite. So
cool.
All right, I want to show you guys compass plant. We've seen some that haven't had a stalk yet, but here's one that's mature, and here's these big, huge leaves that are facing east and west. And here's the main stalk. You know, it's almost 6 foot tall. So we would take the seed head and you just pinch it off. And then for stalks like this, we would probably take 3 or 4 and leave maybe 5 at most, and leave the others. So our rule of thumb is take half on some of these harder to find species such as compass. But then you can see as I break this open, all these are seeds that are inside the seed pod here. So these are ready to go. We could actually probably harvest these and then take them to the seed barn and clean them right away, because they're dry enough that they're really popping. So next we'll show you a penstemon. Okay, we're gonna be heading down that way. Here's foxglove beard tongue, a little bitty guy. I'll just take the whole stem out so you can see it better, but we call it, the scientific name is Penstemon digitalis, but it's all these little pods. And so what I would do, I would take my hand and I would just rake them off with the plant still there. Here's a couple more right in here. You see them right there and right there. So once you get these, they have really tiny, you can see some of the seeds right there. There's the seeds right there. They're blowing away actually as I dump it. So really small seed, neat plant though, out here in the prairie. So cool. Glad you guys got to see our 4 species that we would have collected. And like I said, we collect 284 species a year. It's a lot of fun to be out here in the prairie seeing wildlife. So thanks.
Cool.
We want to show you guys the difference between burn units. This burn unit here, you'll see a lot more wildflowers, see a lot more diversity. Ashy sunflower, compass plant, ironweed, rosinweed, black-eyed Susan. A lot of diversity, and the grasses aren't that thick because we burned this last summer. If we look over here, this is 2 or 3 years since being burned, and the grass component is really thick. It's a solid Indian grass and big blue stem. Here's big blue stem, and this is the classic turkey foot seed head right here for big blue stem. But I showed you guys Indian grass earlier, but this is something that we're going to want to do a fall burn, which is right now. We'll do a September-October burn and set back these grasses because they're putting all their nutrients in their root system right now. And when you knock them this time of year, you will encourage forbs.
Yep.
So that's what we're looking for.
So kind of one of the big challenges is that mix between grass and forbs, and if you don't burn for a while, the grasses kind of start to take over.
Yeah,
and you lose a lot of it.
grasses can get quite dominant, and you know, we used to have a lot of native grazers across the landscape. It really helped us out with the control of these grasses. We had bison, we had elk, we had pronghorn antelope. You know, the bison and elk herds were a big factor across all of Prairie Fork and all of Missouri as far as keeping these systems in balance. You know, so in addition to fire, you've got native grazers that are going across. Just think about these giant herds of thousands of animals going across Prairie Fork. It really would cause a really cool disturbance and help this dominance. Since we don't have these native grazers, we got to do it with fire and with chemical.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Yep. So
There are some parts of Missouri that do have native grazers back. The Nature Conservancy has a couple properties that have really good bison herds. One's called Dunn Ranch. It's up in northwest Missouri. They actually have some really good genetic bison. What I mean by that is it's as pure as you can find. So the few remaining bison that were left in North America were in Wyoming, in Yellowstone National Park, and a few in the Bronx Zoo. And what they did was they kept that strain as pure as they could, because years later they would have bison breed with cattle and kind of have a mixture. So all of these conservation organizations like the Nature Conservancy who have bison have brought that, and they've done reintroductions with that pure genetic strain. So Dunn Ranch has it. Prairie State Park, which is a Department of Natural Resources, it's over south of Kansas City. They've got bison. Missouri Department of Conservation, we don't have any bison units, but you know, we've talked about it here on Prairie Fork, but logistically it's just too hard to have that fencing put up around the perimeter. If you can imagine a bison getting on the highway, 1,000-pound animal. Yeah, we miss those native grazers.
yep. And so cows can pick up some of the slack, but they don't browse the same way that the elk and the bison would, and they don't target the same plants. So
exactly,
you get some effect, but it's just not the same as the type of disturbance you get from the bison and the elk.
Yeah, we do have, on our conservation areas, we do have a lot of areas that do utilize cattle. The thing with cattle grazing is you need to have kind of a flash grazing. It needs to be short intervals. You don't want to take cattle and just dump them off into this prairie, which is really high quality, and just let them graze for months and months and months, because then they'll just devastate it. You put them into a unit such as this for 30 days, you pull them out. You put them over there for 30 days, you pull them out. And so you can have these hot fences. And in southwest Missouri, it's what the locals have done for generations, so they kind of do it naturally. Here in central Missouri, we're more fescue, pasture-driven, more put your cattle out and let them on that same piece of property the whole year, which is not really conducive to native prairie or even reconstructed prairie. So yeah. Cattle do play a real good part, and I wish we had some cool farmers, neighbors that had cattle and would like to graze, but unfortunately we don't. Pretty cool. Well, hello. I want to show you guys a couple of our wetland units. This is an old pond turned into a ephemeral wetland, meaning that this won't go any deeper than 3.5 feet. And what we do is, you see we're standing on top of the dam. There's quite a bit of distance to where the water is at. Traditionally, the water was much higher up this dam. And what we do is, typically on these, we can either work with a water control structure, which can, what that means is we can take out logs and lower the level of the wetland based on the time of the year, do what's called a drawdown. Or just on a traditional pond like this one, we can cut the dam, where you shave down the dam to where the water would go out to a certain depth, and then you stop it right there. And so the importance of these wetlands around Prairie Fork is for mostly reptiles and amphibians. You know, a lot of those species are on the decline. We care for all species here on Prairie Fork. We do a lot of research. So we do restoration, education, and research is the third big one. So Dr. Burns doing research on snakes. We do research out here on bird and crayfish in the past. So bird and crayfish are in prairies or in many different types of habitats, but they build a little burrow that that comes out of the ground about this high, kind of like a little stack of mud.
Looks like a chimney.
Like a chimney, there you go. And they burrow down to the water table, and that's their home. And so one of the species that we did research on was the burrowing crayfish.
And we'll have a PDF of this on the site, so
yes,
you can see what Jeff's holding there.
So these hot spots indicate the highest abundance of burrowing crayfish. And where that comes into importance is the crayfish frog. Crayfish frog is a threatened, state-threatened frog species here in Missouri. We wanted to do reintroduction. We've already done that on Prairie Fork at a couple locations. And the key is to bring that species back. It's pretty much a very obligate species, but research like this and what Dr. Burns is doing will help managers and biologists like myself determine, all right, where can we do make good changes? Where can we help the habitat out by maintaining these wetlands to 3.5 feet? The reason why it's 3.5 feet is because anything deeper than that will allow fish species like largemouth bass, bluegill to survive. If it's lower than that, it'll freeze and kill all the fish out, so it's only good for reptiles and amphibians. The reason why is fish, largemouth bass, and bluegill, they eat a lot of things, pretty much anything that fits in their mouth. And frogs, salamanders, and crayfish frogs particularly, they would eat those in abundance. So where you lower those levels, you can have some awesome reptiles and amphibians show up in many different parts of the year. So just one of the things we do on Prairie Fork. The other research we've done is water hydrology. We do research on the microbial interactions below the soil. We've done research on prairie species, pollinators. I mean, you name it, we've done it out here at Prairie Fork as it relates to the natural communities we have, which is mostly prairie, woodland, and savanna.
Unlike the other WMAs we're doing in this series, this is not open to the public.
That is correct. The reason why it's not open to the public is because we have thousands and thousands of students, anywhere from kindergartners all the way up to college, and even adult groups come out and do education programs out here. We do a lot of research. There's a lot of really expensive research equipment out here. So when the property was donated, the owners that donated the property, Ted and Pat, they requested, hey, we want this to be kind of a laboratory, a place to learn, a place for people to do research and to restore native prairie. And if we didn't do that, for example, like turkey season, if we had thousands of students out here, I can't just gather everybody and say, hey, turkey season's coming up, you guys need to leave. The logistics would be too hard. So we just don't have any hunting. We do have fishing here for groups, catch and release only, but it's just mostly for education. We have scout groups and many different things, but and elementary, middle school groups. But like I said, thousands of people come out here just to learn and enjoy. As Pat would say, learn, get dirty, and have fun. That's what she wanted to donate the property for. So,
great.
Yep.
So to recap for the prairie frog, so prairie frog, the crayfish frog, prairie crayfish frogs.
Yep.
There we go.
Yep. There we go.
I got it out.
Yep.
So
they use the burrows.
Yep. So they are a kind of a prairie obligate species, extirpated from this area, trying to reintroduce them. So kind of the process was those crayfish surveys to find out where the crayfish burrows that the frogs need.
Do we have the habitat for them?
Yep. And then after determining, where to target, you could go to these traditional ponds, get rid of the big fish, and draw them down so they're ephemeral. So now you've got shelter for the frogs to use the burrows during most of the year, and then during the spring, the frogs can use these ponds for reproduction. And we're not allowed to say if any frogs have been introduced or not yet, because this is top secret information.
That's right.
But in a few years, stay tuned, and we might have crayfish frogs out here.
That's right. All right, look what Mike found.
This is a speckled king snake. Its colors are not spectacular because it is in the middle of shedding. Yeah, I don't know if you can see its eyes, but its eyes are really milky.
Yeah.
This snake is just about to shed its skin.
Really cool. Oh, there we go. I can see it.
Yep.
And where'd you find it at, Mike?
So I've been doing some snake research out here and lifted up this cover board that I've had out here, and this snake was hanging out just under the board.
Cool.
So their defense mechanism is not necessarily to bite, it's to release this disgusting smelling musk on whatever's handling them. And I am now covered in disgusting smelling musk. So I hope you guys appreciate what I do for you.
Awesome.
I now smell like a disgusting pissed off snake, and will for the rest of the day. But there we go.
All right, cool.
Hey, I'm 2 for 2. This is 2 years in a row I was able to get a speckled king snake during a class time.
He's awesome, man.
Yeah. All right, I'm gonna put him or her back and let them get back to shedding their skin.
Cool.
I caught the biggest prairie king snake I've ever seen out of.
Okay. Mike's gonna check out a board here. Oh, look at that guy.
Yeah, hey, we're 2 for 2.
2 for 2. That guy's beautiful.
Oh yeah, this is another.
Look at that.
This is what a speckled king snake looks like when they're not about to shed and they're in their actual color pattern. How cool is this critter?
Wow. Yeah, that guy's awesome, man.
And again, I'm getting musk.
2 for 2 on that.
Yeah, the snakes, you don't got to worry about snakes biting you unless it's a venomous snake. What you do have to worry about is, oh, that's disgusting. They release a disgusting smelling chemical to make you want to let go of them, which is now, there's a whole bunch of it on me. But yeah, so I've been doing some snake research out here, not on this species, trying to find a different species, the prairie king snake. This is a speckled king snake. And as part of that, I've got these cover boards spread out through the prairie. You put them out, leave them out over time, and they create good habitat for reptiles and other things to live underneath. They kind of provide some protection. When it's colder out, they provide some warmth. Oh, you see it rattling its tail?
Oh, he's trying to...
They do their rattlesnake impersonation.
He's trying to do his best to scare you off there.
But you'll notice what it hasn't done. It has not even pretended to try to bite me.
No.
So snakes are really not that scary. That being said, I am covered in disgusting smelling musk, and we're going to let this guy put him back. In fact, he pooped. There's the poop.
There you go.
There you go, dude. Go back. Sorry to bug you.
All right,
Yeah.
cool.